smoke thick as pitch choked the skies over the greatest metropolis of the 6th century. The year was 532 AD, and the heart of the Byzantine Empire was tearing itself apart. Tens of thousands of furious citizens battered against the gates of the great palace, their unified roars of Nika, or conquer, echoing through the marble colonnades. This was no mere civil unrest. The Nika Riots were a cataclysmic eruption of political fury, chariot-racing factionalism, and crushing taxation that threatened to consume everything in a storm of fire and blood. Inside the besieged palace, the air was thick with panic and the stench of burning cedar. Emperor Justinian I, the architect of a sprawling, ambitious regime, paced the mosaic floors in frantic despair. His most trusted advisors, hardened veterans of statecraft and military campaigns, urged him to flee. Ships waited in the darkened harbor, their sails ready to carry the sovereign across the sea to safety. The glittering dream of a restored Roman world was crumbling into ash, and the sovereign was prepared to abandon the monumental throne to save his own life from the mob. Yet, as the imperial council finalized their desperate escape, a lone voice cut through the terror. Empress Theodora, a powerful woman who had clawed her way from the absolute dregs of society to the pinnacle of global authority, refused to yield. She stood before the trembling men of the court, her purple silken robes a stark contrast to the soot-stained wall. According to historical chroniclers, she delivered a chilling ultimatum, declaring that those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Royalty, she coldly proclaimed, makes a fine burial shroud. To understand the sheer gravity of this defiant stand, one must look back to the shadows from which this extraordinary ruler emerged. Decades before she commanded armies and dictated laws, she was born into the lowest, most despised caste of the ancient world. Her father was a bear trainer for the Green faction at the Hippodrome, the massive entertainment arena that served as the beating heart of Constantinople. When he died suddenly, her destitute mother presented her 3 young daughters to the roaring crowds, begging for salvation. The arena offered no mercy, only brutal exploitation. The young girl was thrust into the world of the theater, a profession synonymous with prostitution and absolute social ruin in the eyes of the Roman elite. Actresses were legally barred from marrying citizens of rank, considered little more than property by the patrician class. She survived in the chaotic underbelly of the Mediterranean, traveling as a comic performer and courtesan, learning the ruthless mechanics of human desire, manipulation, and survival in a world designed to crush her. Her ascent from the dust of the theater to the imperial court remains one of history's most staggering political anomalies. When she returned to the capital, she caught the eye of Justinian, who was then the heir apparent to his uncle, Emperor Justin. He was a man consumed by grand theological and legal visions. She was a woman forged in the fires of worldly survival. His obsession with her was so absolute that he forced his uncle to rewrite ancient Roman law, erasing the statutes that forbade senators from marrying actresses. Upon ascending the throne, the new sovereign did not merely take a wife, he crowned a co-ruler. She was granted the title of Augusta, an equal partner in the administration of the vast, sprawling state. She was deeply intelligent, politically ruthless, and intimately familiar with the desperate lives of the common people. The patrician elite whispered in horrified tones about her scandalous past, yet they bowed before her, terrified of her vast intelligence network and her unyielding grip on the levers of state power. It was this iron-forged resilience that anchored the crumbling regime during the apocalyptic days of the Nika Riots. Her refusal to flee the burning capital shattered the panic paralyzing the imperial council. Galvanized by her terrifying resolve, the emperor abandoned his escape plans and summoned his most brilliant and brutal generals, Belisarius and Mundus. The time for appeasement had passed. The empress had demanded survival, and survival required a merciless display of martial force. The imperial troops descended upon the Hippodrome, where the rebel factions had gathered to crown a usurper. The gates were barred, and the slaughter that followed was absolute. 30,000 citizens were butchered on the blood-soaked sands of the arena, their bodies piled high beneath the monuments of ancient pharaohs and conquerors. The throne was saved, but the cost was a horrific massacre that would forever stain the legacy of the regime. The rebellion was drowned in a sea of blood. When the smoke finally cleared, half of the great metropolis lay in ruin. Yet, from this devastation, the royal couple envisioned a rebirth that would eclipse the glory of ancient Rome. They embarked on an unprecedented architectural campaign, transforming the charred rubble into a canvas for imperial propaganda. The destruction of the old city provided the perfect opportunity to build a new, awe-inspiring capital that would project their absolute authority to the furthest corners of the known world. The crown jewel of this monumental rebuilding effort was the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, rising from the ashes of its predecessor. Its massive, seemingly weightless dome became a marvel of engineering and a testament to divine favor. The Empress's influence was woven into the very fabric of the magnificent building, her royal monogram intertwined with her husband's on the intricately carved capitals of the soaring marble columns. It stood as a permanent, glittering reminder that their reign was unshakable. Beyond stone and mortar, her impact profoundly reshaped the legal landscape of the era. Drawing from the bitter realities of her youth, she championed unprecedented protections for women within the sweeping codification of Roman law. She outlawed the forced prostitution of young girls, expanded the rights of mothers to secure guardianship of their children, and instituted the death penalty for rape. For the first time, the law recognized the vulnerability of women in a patriarchal society, shielding them from the abuses she had intimately witnessed. Her crusade for the marginalized extended into direct, radical social action. She used her immense wealth to purchase the freedom of sex workers sold into brothels, breaking the chains of debt bondage that trapped them. On the shores of the Bosphorus, she established the Convent of Repentance, a sanctuary where former prostitutes could live in peace and dignity, free from the brutal exploitation of the streets. It was a deeply personal mission, a powerful leader reaching back into the darkness to pull others into the light, yet her influence was not universally beloved, particularly in the treacherous realm of theology. The empire was tearing itself apart over the nature of Christ, split between the Orthodox Chalcedonians and the breakaway Monophysites. The emperor was a staunch, uncompromising defender of orthodoxy, determined to enforce religious unity across his domains. This theological schism threatened to permanently fracture the eastern provinces, pitting the capital against the wealthy, rebellious populations of Egypt and Syria in a bitter ideological war. In a breathtaking display of political autonomy, Empress Theodora actively subverted her husband's religious policies. While Justinian persecuted the Monophysites, she quietly provided them with funding, safe passage, and imperial protection. She even transformed sections of her own sprawling palace complex into a hidden sanctuary for fugitive monks and exiled bishops. This was a dangerous, high-stakes game of theological chess, played right under the nose of the emperor, designed to maintain the loyalty of the eastern provinces through covert diplomacy. Her reach extended far beyond the walls of the palace and the borders of Constantinople. She maintained her own extensive correspondence with foreign monarchs, receiving ambassadors and negotiating treaties independently of the official state apparatus. Persian kings and barbarian warlords quickly learned that to secure favor in the capital, one had to appease the empress just as much as the emperor. She wielded a shadow diplomacy that was as effective as any marching army, neutralizing threats before they ever reached the frontier. The ultimate test of her solitary authority arrived in the year 541 AD, when a catastrophic outbreak of bubonic plague swept across the Mediterranean world. The streets of the capital were choked with the dead, and the economy ground to a terrifying halt. When the emperor himself contracted the horrific disease and slipped into a coma, the fragile stability of the state hung by a thread. The armies were paralyzed, and ambitious generals began to circle the throne like vultures. With her husband hovering near death, she seized total control of the imperial machinery. She governed the vast territories alone, issuing decrees, managing the collapsing supply lines and brutally suppressing any whispers of a military coup. When generals in the East murmured about succession, she had them swiftly recalled and neutralized, ensuring that no rival could exploit the vacuum of power. During the darkest days of the plague, she was the solitary pillar holding the fracturing world together. Miraculously, the emperor survived the pestilence, but the world he awoke to was fundamentally altered. The population was decimated, the treasury was drained, and the once boundless optimism of their early reign was replaced by a grim, paranoid struggle for survival. As the years dragged on, the vibrant, indomitable energy that had defined Empress Theodora began to fade. The relentless toll of governance and the lingering shadows of the plague years steadily eroded her health. In the year 548 AD, the extraordinary life of the empress came to a quiet, devastating end. Chroniclers suggest she succumbed to a brutal battle with cancer, passing away in the sprawling palace she had ruled with an iron will. Her death shattered Emperor Justinian. The man who had envisioned conquering the world wept openly, his grand ambitions suddenly hollow without the brilliant, terrifying partner who had guided his hand through every crisis. For nearly 2 decades after her passing, the aging ruler governed the vast territories alone, but he never took another wife. He continued to pass legislation, yet he meticulously preserved the laws and protections she had championed, often invoking her memory in his official decrees. The shadow of her intellect and her unyielding resolve remained woven into the fabric of the state. Even in death, she continued to shape the destiny of the millions who lived under the Roman eagle. From the squalid, dangerous underbelly of the hippodrome to the glittering mosaic-lined halls of supreme authority, her journey defies all historical precedent. She was a woman who weaponized her early trauma, manipulated the rigid structures of a patriarchal world, and ultimately saved a crumbling empire from its own violent self-destruction. The legacy of Empress Theodora endures not merely in the stones of the Hagia Sophia, but in the timeless truth that the most profound power often rises from the places the world has chosen to forget.